Have you ever wondered how power and success can lead us down paths we never expected? How pride, that silent force within us, can blind us to the very source of our strength? It's something we all experience at some point in life, believing that our achievements are solely the result of our own hard work and determination. But what happens when we forget the bigger picture? When we lose sight of the greater power at work behind the scenes? This is where the story of Nebuchadnezzar begins. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most powerful kings in human history. His reign stretched over one of the mightiest empires the world had ever seen, Babylon. He conquered nations, built grand cities, and was both feared and revered by all who knew his name. His success, however, came at a cost. The more he gained, the more he attributed his victories and empire to his own brilliance. Pride clouded his vision, leading him to believe that he alone was the architect of his destiny. But Nebuchadnezzar's story offers us more than just a tale of ancient power. His journey serves as a profound reminder of how pride can blind us to the reality of divine sovereignty and how, in our moments of greatest achievement, we are often most vulnerable to losing our way. In this video, we'll explore the rise, fall, and eventual redemption of Nebuchadnezzar, a king who learned, through the hardest of lessons, that true greatness comes not from our own strength, but from acknowledging a power greater than ourselves. His story is not just a historical account. It's a timeless lesson for all of us about the dangers of pride and the path to humility. Stay with me until the end of this journey. Together, we'll uncover how Nebuchadnezzar's life holds important insights for us today. Insights that can transform the way we view our own lives and the power dynamics we encounter. By the end of this video, you'll see how the lessons from this ancient king can guide you toward a life of deeper humility, spiritual growth, and a renewed understanding of what it means to truly succeed. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just a king, he was a force of nature. Rising to power in the 6th century BC, his reign marked the height of the Babylonian Empire. Under his leadership, Babylon became the most powerful and feared empire in the ancient world, unmatched in military strength, wealth, and influence. Nebuchadnezzar's name became synonymous with success, and his empire stretched across vast territories, from Egypt to Persia. The city of Babylon itself was a marvel. Known for its grand walls, towering ziggurats, and opulent palaces, it was the pinnacle of human achievement at the time. And at the center of it all stood Nebuchadnezzar, the king who had made it all possible. Some historical accounts even credit him with constructing the legendary Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Although the existence of these gardens remains debated, the fact that such a wonder could even be attributed to him speaks to his unmatched influence and power. But Nebuchadnezzar was more than just a builder of cities. He was a conqueror. His military campaigns were vast and relentless, spreading Babylonian control far and wide. One of his most famous conquests was Jerusalem, where he captured the city and brought the Israelites into exile. This was a defining moment in biblical history, as Nebuchadnezzar's power seemed limitless. His armies were invincible, and wherever they went, they left a trail of conquered lands and subjugated peoples. Imagine the kind of leader Nebuchadnezzar must have been. A man so revered and feared that entire nations would bow before him, offering tribute without question. His people looked to him as a hero, a king who had made Babylon the greatest empire on earth. And indeed, to human eyes, he seemed untouchable, a man in control of his destiny, a king who lacked nothing. But here's where the story begins to shift. With all his success, Nebuchadnezzar started to believe that his power was the result of his own genius and strength. The pride in his heart began to grow. He no longer saw himself as just a king, but as the source of all that Babylon had become. You can almost feel the tension building in the background. How often do we, in our own lives, look at our achievements and take full credit for them? We think, I worked hard for this. I deserve it. And while there's truth in hard work, the danger lies in forgetting that there's more to the story than our own efforts. Nebuchadnezzar's rise was grand, but it set the stage for an even more dramatic fall. As his pride continued to grow, so did the danger. What Nebuchadnezzar didn't realize was that his empire, his victories, and his very life were all under the authority of a higher power. And soon, he would be faced with a divine lesson that would change everything. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just a king, he was a force of nature. Rising to power in the 6th century BC, his reign marked the height of the Babylonian Empire. Under his leadership, Babylon became the most powerful and feared empire in the ancient world, unmatched in military strength, wealth, and influence. Nebuchadnezzar's name became synonymous with success, and his empire stretched across vast territories, from Egypt to Persia. The city of Babylon itself was a marvel. Known for its grand walls, towering ziggurats, and opulent palaces, it was the pinnacle of human achievement at the time. And at the center of it all stood Nebuchadnezzar, the king who had made it all possible. Some historical accounts even credit him with constructing the legendary Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Although the existence of these gardens remains debated, the fact that such a wonder could even be attributed to him speaks to his unmatched influence and power. But Nebuchadnezzar was more than just a builder of cities. He was a conqueror. His military campaigns were vast and relentless, spreading Babylonian control far and wide. One of his most famous conquests was Jerusalem, where he captured the city and brought the Israelites into exile. This was a defining moment in biblical history, as Nebuchadnezzar's power seemed limitless. His armies were invincible, and wherever they went, they left a trail of conquered lands and subjugated peoples. Imagine the kind of leader Nebuchadnezzar must have been. A man so revered and feared that entire nations would bow before him, offering tribute without question. His people looked to him as a hero, a king who had made Babylon the greatest empire on earth. And indeed, to human eyes, he seemed untouchable, a man in control of his destiny, a king who lacked nothing. But here's where the story begins to shift. With all his success, Nebuchadnezzar started to believe that his power was the result of his own genius and strength. The pride in his heart began to grow. He no longer saw himself as just a king, but as the source of all that Babylon had become. You can almost feel the tension building in the background. How often do we, in our own lives, look at our achievements and take full credit for them? We think, I worked hard for this. I deserve it. And while there's truth in hard work, the danger lies in forgetting that there's more to the story than our own efforts. Nebuchadnezzar's rise was grand, but it set the stage for an even more dramatic fall. As his pride continued to grow, so did the danger. What Nebuchadnezzar didn't realize was that his empire, his victories, and his very life were all under the authority of a higher power. And soon, he would be faced with a divine lesson that would change everything. Nebuchadnezzar's reign continued in splendor, but beneath the surface, a divine message was being prepared for him, a message that would shake him to his core. One night, as the king lay in his royal chambers, he had a dream that disturbed him deeply. It wasn't an ordinary dream. It was vivid, strange, and filled with symbolism that he couldn't understand. The image of a great tree reaching to the heavens, visible to the ends of the earth, filled his mind. This tree provided shelter to all creatures, its leaves were lush, and its fruit abundant. But in an instant, everything changed. A heavenly voice commanded that the tree be cut down, leaving only the stump in the ground, bound with iron and bronze. The animals scattered, and the tree's glory was reduced to nothing. Nebuchadnezzar woke with a sense of dread. What could this dream mean? Why did it fill him with such fear? In desperation, he summoned the wisest men in his kingdom, the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners, to interpret the dream for him. Yet none of them could provide an answer. It was as if the meaning was hidden from human understanding. Then there was Daniel. Daniel, the prophet of God, had gained Nebuchadnezzar's respect over the years for his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams. Unlike the others, Daniel didn't rely on earthly knowledge or magic. His gift came from the Lord. So, Nebuchadnezzar called for him, hoping that Daniel could unravel the mystery that tormented him. When Daniel heard the dream, his face grew pale, and for a moment, he was silent. He knew the meaning, but it wasn't an easy message to deliver. Finally, with a heavy heart, Daniel revealed the truth to the king. "The tree you saw, O king, is you," Daniel began. "You have grown great and strong. Your greatness has reached the heavens, and your dominion stretches to the ends of the earth." Nebuchadnezzar listened, but there was a growing tension in the room. Daniel's words, though complimentary at first, carried a warning. "But just as the tree was cut down, so too will you be driven away from men and live with the animals of the field. You will eat grass like the ox, and your body will be drenched with the dew of heaven. This will continue for 7 years, until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes." The silence was deafening. Nebuchadnezzar was being given a clear message. If he did not humble himself and recognize God's sovereignty, he would lose everything. His power, his kingdom, and even his sanity would be stripped away, leaving him to live like a beast until he learned the ultimate lesson in humility. But there was hope. Daniel urged the king to repent, saying, "Therefore, O king, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue." The tension in this moment is palpable. Would Nebuchadnezzar heed the warning and humble himself, or would his pride drive him to ignore this divine omen? This part of the story leaves us with a powerful question. How often do we ignore the warnings in our own lives? How many times have we been given signs that we're heading in the wrong direction, yet we continue down the same path? Nebuchadnezzar's dream was more than just a message for a king. It's a message for all of us. Pride blinds us to the truth, but God, in His mercy, often sends us warnings to bring us back before it's too late. The question now is, will Nebuchadnezzar change, or will his arrogance lead to his downfall? Despite the divine warning given to him through the dream, Nebuchadnezzar's heart remained hardened. Time passed, and the memory of Daniel's words seemed to fade. The king continued to walk in his pride, convinced that Babylon's greatness was the result of his own power and wisdom. His kingdom flourished, his palaces gleamed in the sunlight, and his influence stretched far beyond the borders of Babylon. To him, there was no reason to change. He was untouchable, or so he thought. Then, one fateful day, the moment came. Nebuchadnezzar was standing on the roof of his palace, gazing out at the breathtaking city of Babylon. With a heart full of pride, he declared, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Daniel 4 verse 30. These words, filled with arrogance and self-glory, sealed his fate. No sooner had they left his lips than a voice from heaven thundered, "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes." In an instant, everything changed. Nebuchadnezzar, the mighty king, was struck down, his mind shattered, and he was reduced to a state of madness. Stripped of his royal robes, he was driven from his palace, no longer fit to rule. The once glorious king, who had commanded armies and built one of the greatest cities in history, was now wandering the fields like a wild animal. His hair grew long and matted, his nails became like the claws of a bird, and he ate grass like the beasts of the field. Imagine the shock of those who witnessed this fall. The once proud ruler, now reduced to living like an animal, crawling on all fours in the dirt. The contrast between his former glory and his new reality couldn't have been more striking. Nebuchadnezzar had fallen from the highest heights of human achievement to the lowest depths of humiliation. But what is even more profound is the spiritual lesson embedded in this dramatic fall. Nebuchadnezzar's story isn't just about a king losing his throne. It's about the destructive nature of pride and the consequences of refusing to acknowledge God's authority. Pride has the power to blind us, making us believe that we are in control of our lives and destinies. But the truth is, no matter how much we achieve or how powerful we become, we are never beyond the reach of God's sovereignty. Nebuchadnezzar's fall serves as a warning to all of us. How often do we, in moments of success, forget that everything we have is a gift from God? How many times do we ignore the subtle warnings in our lives, thinking that we are untouchable? Like Nebuchadnezzar, we are all vulnerable to pride, and if left unchecked, pride has the potential to lead us to our own downfall. As Nebuchadnezzar wandered the fields in his madness, separated from his throne, his people, and even his humanity, it became clear that this was more than just punishment. It was a lesson. God was stripping away everything that Nebuchadnezzar had relied on, his power, his intellect, his influence, until there was nothing left but the raw truth, that all authority belongs to God alone. The question for us is this: how often do we resist humility? How many times has pride led us down paths where we refuse to recognize God's hand in our lives? Nebuchadnezzar's story shows us that pride may elevate us for a time, but it ultimately leads to destruction. Yet, even in the midst of this dark period, there was still hope for redemption. The king's journey wasn't over. The God who humbles is also the God who restores. But before restoration could come, Nebuchadnezzar had to learn the most important lesson of his life. Nebuchadnezzar's fall wasn't just a punishment. It was a divine lesson in humility. As he roamed the fields like an animal, stripped of his power, glory, and even his sanity, the message was clear. Human pride unchecked leads to ruin. But beneath the surface of this harsh reality lay a deeper truth, one that would become the key to his restoration. For 7 long years, Nebuchadnezzar lived in this state of madness. 7 years of isolation, far from the grandeur of his palace, removed from the people who once revered him. This was the ultimate humbling experience, being brought low in every possible way. Yet, even in this humiliation, God's mercy was at work. The stump left behind from the great tree in Nebuchadnezzar's dream symbolized that his kingdom wasn't completely destroyed. There was still hope for restoration, but it would only come through repentance and a recognition of the true source of all power. Nebuchadnezzar's life during those years symbolizes what happens when humans stray too far from their humility and dependence on God. It's as if, in his madness, he was being taught a spiritual truth that he had long ignored, that apart from God, we lose touch with our true identity. We become less than what we were created to be. Nebuchadnezzar's animalistic existence was a vivid metaphor for what happens when pride separates us from the divine. We forget who we are, and in doing so, we lose the very essence of what makes us human, our relationship with God. But this story isn't just about Nebuchadnezzar, it's about us. How often do we allow pride to take root in our hearts, distancing us from the humility God desires? Pride tells us we don't need help, that we are in control, that we've earned everything by our own strength. But the Bible teaches something radically different. It says, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. James 4 verse 6. Humility, then, is not a sign of weakness. It's the path to true greatness. It's an acknowledgement that everything we have and everything we are comes from God. Nebuchadnezzar's journey is a powerful reminder of the destructive nature of pride and the redemptive power of humility. His story shows us that even in our darkest moments, when everything seems lost, God can use those moments to teach us the lessons we most need to learn. Pride blinds us, but humility opens our eyes to the truth. And the truth is this: we are not the source of our own greatness, God is. As we reflect on Nebuchadnezzar's experience, it's important to ask ourselves, in what areas of our lives might pride be taking hold? Where are we resisting the call to humility? It could be in our careers, our relationships, or even our spiritual lives. The world tells us to pursue success and recognition, but God calls us to something deeper. He calls us to humility, to recognize that without Him we are nothing. But the story doesn't end with Nebuchadnezzar's fall. There is hope on the horizon. The king's 7 years of humiliation were not the end of his journey. They were a prelude to something greater, his restoration. And this restoration would come, not through pride, but through a profound recognition of God's sovereignty. Nebuchadnezzar was about to experience the greatest transformation of his life, but only after he learned the divine lesson of humility. So, as we prepare to move forward in this story, consider this. Where might God be calling you to humility in your own life? What lessons are you being invited to learn that, if embraced, could lead to a deeper relationship with God and a restored sense of purpose? After 7 long years of living like a beast, wandering in the fields, separated from his royal life and sanity, Nebuchadnezzar's moment of redemption finally arrived. The Bible tells us that at the end of this period, Nebuchadnezzar lifted his eyes to heaven. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with profound significance. In this act, Nebuchadnezzar was acknowledging that there was a power greater than his own, a power that he had long denied. As soon as Nebuchadnezzar looked to heaven and recognized God's sovereignty, his sanity was restored. It was as if the fog of madness that had clouded his mind for so long suddenly lifted, and he could once again think clearly. But this time, Nebuchadnezzar was not the same man he had been before. His heart had been transformed by the lesson of humility that God had so mercifully taught him. He was no longer the prideful king who believed that all his success was due to his own brilliance. Instead, he was a man who understood that his power, his kingdom, and even his life were all gifts from the Most High God. Nebuchadnezzar was not just restored to sanity, he was restored to his throne. But his restoration wasn't simply a return to his former glory. This time, Nebuchadnezzar ruled with a new perspective, one that was deeply rooted in humility and the recognition of God's ultimate authority. The Bible records his own words as he reflected on his transformation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. Daniel 4 verse 34. This was a different Nebuchadnezzar than the one who had boasted about building Babylon by his own power. Now he openly praised God, declaring, "His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation." The proud king had become a humble servant of the Most High, and his transformation was complete. What's even more remarkable is that not only was Nebuchadnezzar's mind restored, but his kingdom was too. His advisors and nobles sought him out, and he was reestablished in his position of authority with even greater honor than before. But the difference now was that Nebuchadnezzar knew who was truly in control. His reign, which had once been defined by arrogance and self-glory, was now marked by humility and reverence for God. Nebuchadnezzar's story didn't end in humiliation. It ended in redemption. And his final words in the book of Daniel reflect the depth of his transformation. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble. Daniel 4 verse 37. The lesson here is clear. No matter how far we fall, no matter how deep our pride takes us, there is always a path back to God if we are willing to humble ourselves and acknowledge his sovereignty. Nebuchadnezzar's redemption shows us that God's grace is greater than our pride, and his ability to restore us is far beyond what we could ever imagine. This story of restoration gives hope to all of us. No matter where we find ourselves, whether we're struggling with pride, feeling lost, or even experiencing the consequences of our own mistakes, God is always ready to redeem us if we turn to him. Just as Nebuchadnezzar's life was transformed, so too can our lives be restored when we submit to God's authority and embrace humility. As we reflect on Nebuchadnezzar's journey from pride to humility, from madness to restoration, it's worth asking ourselves, in what areas of our lives do we need redemption? Where have we let pride separate us from God, and how can we turn back to Him, acknowledging His sovereignty and trusting in His grace? Nebuchadnezzar's story is one of the most powerful accounts of transformation in the Bible. From the heights of power and prestige to the depths of humiliation, his life is a testimony to the dangers of pride and the redemptive power of humility. As we reflect on his journey, we see that it wasn't just about a king who lost his throne and regained it. It's about how God's sovereignty prevails, even in the lives of the mightiest rulers. Nebuchadnezzar's rise to power was unmatched. He ruled the most powerful empire of his time, commanded armies, and built cities that were the envy of the ancient world. But his greatest downfall was not losing a battle or failing as a king. It was his failure to acknowledge God as the source of all his success. His pride led him to believe that he was the master of his own destiny, a belief that blinded him to the truth. And so, Nebuchadnezzar fell. His humiliation was dramatic, reduced to living like an animal, stripped of all his royal dignity. But even in this lowly state, God's mercy was at work. This was not the end of Nebuchadnezzar's story. It was the turning point. Through this humbling experience, Nebuchadnezzar came to understand the lesson that we all must learn, that God is sovereign over everything, and true greatness comes through humility. In the end, Nebuchadnezzar was restored not just to his throne, but to a right relationship with God. His redemption came when he finally lifted his eyes to heaven, acknowledging God's authority and power. This transformation, from a prideful king to a humble servant of the Most High, is a reminder that no matter how far we fall, God's grace is always available to those who turn to Him. Now let's turn the focus to ourselves. Nebuchadnezzar's story may be ancient, but the lessons are timeless. Pride is something we all struggle with in different forms. Whether it's pride in our achievements, our status, or our abilities, it can blind us to the truth that everything we have comes from God. And just as pride led to Nebuchadnezzar's fall, it can also lead us away from the path God has for us. So, I invite you to reflect. Where in your life might pride be taking root? Are there areas where you are relying more on your own strength than on God's? Nebuchadnezzar's story is a call to surrender, to acknowledge that we are not the ultimate source of our success, but that everything we have is a gift from the one who is truly in control. As we conclude this journey through Nebuchadnezzar's life, let it inspire us to live with humility, recognizing God's hand in every aspect of our lives. His story shows us that no matter how great our pride or how far we fall, there is always a path to redemption through humility and a recognition of God's sovereignty. Finally, I encourage you to take action. Reflect on the lessons from Nebuchadnezzar's story and consider how they apply to your life. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which lesson from Nebuchadnezzar's story touched you the most? And don't forget to like this video and share it with others who may need to hear this powerful message of humility and redemption. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the rise, fall, and redemption of Nebuchadnezzar. May his story inspire you to walk humbly with God and embrace His grace, no matter where life takes you.